the African population.
Half the planet will be Africa.
Population explosion.
It's going to change economics, it's going to change global strategy, military power, it's going to change culture. It will be a very different world.
From Abidjan in the Ivory Coast to Lagos in Nigeria, a megalopolis is to be built, stretching along the west coast of Africa. It is to be the largest city in human history. Towering in this line will be skyscrapers designed for offices, hotels, or shopping complexes, and a highway running down the middle. It is to become the African city of the future, established across borders. Such information on the basis of recent agreements between African countries was reported by The Guardian. A rather bold vision given the problems the continent has finally faced for years, with many economists wondering when Africa will finally see an economic boom, such as that seen in Asia with, for example, China, South Korea, Taiwan, and Singapore. All indications are that it could happen later this decade, with a stark example being Rwanda, which has increased its GDP by as much as 6 times in just 20 years, and more than 50 times in 50 years. Of course, this country is not on the West African coast, but it is a good example of the fact that Africa is developing, and there will be players that will be relevant to the world in a short while. Africa's population is growing extremely fast, and this process cannot be stopped in any way. But paradoxically, this great continent has little land to accommodate nearly 3 billion people, and that is how many are expected to live there by 2050. By 2100, Africa's population will be larger than Asia's. Processes are taking place there that will shake up world geopolitics and change the global balance of power forever. Looking now only at the destination where the world's new largest city is to be built, is that in Nigeria alone, from 230 million people living there today, the population will increase to 380 million people. Similar increases will be recorded by the Ivory Coast, Ghana, Togo, and Benin. Already there are about 100 million people living along the coast there. Almost as many as in the world's laziest metropolitan area, the Pearl River Delta in China.
By 2050, Africa will account for about a quarter of the world's population, as against less than 10% in 1950. It will already, by 2050, have by far the largest workforce in the world. Another reason we have to pay attention. 1/3 of the world's youth, which is an age category between 15 and 24, will be African. These are things that are going to impact every aspect of life you or I could think about.
Therefore, given the data that in 2050, there will be only slightly fewer people living in West Africa than in China, it was Africans who decided to get ahead of the process by creating the world's largest supermetropolis. And that's what we're going to look at today. That's why today we'll check for you what plans are already in place for its creation, where they'll get the money for it, how important this change in global geopolitics will be, and what this new world's largest city will look like. I invite you to watch today's report. The heads of the African Development Bank have already raised and allocated the huge sum of $16 billion to build a new highway along the Gulf of Guinea from Abidjan to Lagos. The road will be up to 6 lanes wide. This information was given to the Guardian newspaper by Liddy Ihuman, a transportation economist at the bank. The Trans-West African Coastal Highway is a transnational highway project to connect 12 coastal countries in West Africa, from Mauritania in the northwest of the region to Nigeria in the east, with roads to the landlocked countries, Mali and Burkina Faso. The final destination of the highways in the east will be Nigeria's Lagos. In contrast, some organizations, such as the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, consider its western end to be Nouakchott in Mauritania, while others, such as the Economic Commission for Africa, consider Dakar in Senegal as the western end. At this point, however, it is mainly the construction of the segment you see now that is being considered. The creation of this highway will change Africa. It will cause local communities to begin to connect, and it will be the first integrated initiative similar to those that were created in the early days of the European Union. The 600-kilometer stretch between Abidjan, the capital of Côte d'Ivoire, and Lagos, Nigeria's largest city, is headed for record population density by 2050. After all, China's Pearl River Valley will be 5 times less populous because 500 million people are expected to live along the road we're talking about, who will be relocated to the coast from inland rural areas. According to experts, This could be the beginning of an economic boom on the continent that will change its previous character forever.
The biggest number you have here is 4 billion, which is projected to be the population of Africa at the end of this century, and that's basically going to be half the planet. Half the planet will be African.
I always say that demography is one lens on the future, but it's only one lens. But for sure, when there are 6 or 7 times as many Africans as Europeans, versus when, going back to 1950, there were twice the number of Europeans to Africans, it will change everything. It's going to change the demography is the sort of fundamental thing. It's going to change economics. It's going to change global strategy, military power. It's going to change culture. It's going to change food. It will be a very different world.
The Abidjan-Lagos Corridor is a flagship project of the African Infrastructure Development Program, PIDA, and is just part of the broader Dakar-Lagos Corridor and an important part of the Trans-African Highway Network in the ECOWAS region. Although the entire project is expected to be completed around 2030, advanced work is already underway in several locations. One of them, among others, is Accra, the capital of Ghana. The country's authorities have created a $1.3 billion project to take tourism to a whole new level. Architects from Ajayi Associates want to transform the waterfront into a world-class tourism enclave that will be built on 248 acres. Natural materials are to be used during construction, that is clay and stone, instead of steel and concrete. It's all in the first line from the water, and a highway is to run in the second line to connect the entire great metropolis of West Africa. In fact, the money is already there, and shovels have been driven into the ground, so this is not another of the pseudo-mega projects that will be built in the very distant future, but a viable concept that is mainly based on something simple, that is building a road and preparing zones for business, tourism, and housing. The same processes took place in many countries. First roads, then planning, then development. Poland developed based on this. Hitler created the power of the Third Reich by creating a network of highways, and China achieved great success in just 30 years thanks to its road connection to seaports. I know it is rather strange that Africa only discovers this scheme in the mid-2020s, but better late than never. It's also worth noting that the countries that will be creating this new super city on their coast, contrary to appearances, are not poor at all. The richest of them is Côte d'Ivoire, with a per capita GDP of $2,600. Right next to it are Ghana and Nigeria. Slightly worse off are Togo and Benin. But the development of these two will be directly dependent on their neighbors. Nevertheless, these countries are economically close to what Ukraine was achieving before the war began. This is no longer the third world after all. They are close to those of India, and India successfully sent a rover to the moon recently. Had these countries pursued a coherent economic and political strategy with each other earlier, they probably would have long overtaken India, which is, after all, being considered for a future superpower. What you see now is a graph of the population of the world's largest cities in the near future. For the moment, of course, the largest city, without considering the metropolitan area, is Tokyo, but Lagos, which is also Africa's largest city, will overtake it by about 2040. This city, as recently as 10 years ago, was estimated to have a population of 11.5 million. Unofficial calculations, however, spoke of 18 million people. That's 40 times more than in 1960, when Nigeria declared independence. It is one of the fastest growing cities on the continent. Lagos is, of course, only one component of this great African metropolis.
Even though Lagos is quite lucrative when it comes to remuneration in terms of your pay at the end of the month. But then there are this struggle for transportation. Sometimes when you have to, your opening hour at work is maybe 8 a.m., but you have to wake up by 4.
I think people come into Lagos on a daily basis. If you're at Bega, I've been at Bega in the middle of the night before, coming in from another town, and I saw that through the night, people were coming in till daybreak. There was no stop at Bega. Bega doesn't sleep.
So many people in Lagos, that don't even know. Lagos now home of nobody. So many people dey here, understand? Even more congested than ever before.
Well, I think for people who probably have actually grown up in Lagos and we're kind of used to it. That's what I can say.
I am appealing to the government that they should do something about it because masses are very suffering. They are suffering.
But this city alone will already have more than 32 million people in 2050, and including the metropolitan area, it will already be 100 million. Therefore, the vision of the emergence of such a large metropolis in Africa is not a pipe dream, it is a fact. The city stackle is growing as economic migrants come to the center from all over Nigeria and the region. Developers are trying to capitalize on the influx of investors. Skyscrapers are popping up in the wealthy residential areas of Ikoyi, Lekki, and Victoria Island. The city's elite are just forming. In fact, it is an El Dorado for the brave. Whoever risks more can gain the most. Interestingly, Lagos itself is the best city in Africa in terms of taxes by far, attracting the most startups. Lagos will be a key part of the African megalopolis, a region attracting innovation and technology, but at the same time, through overpopulation, the natural process will be to stretch the population along the entire West African coast. Cities along the route such as Cotonou and Lome are much less developed, but nevertheless, the population in them will also grow dramatically. They themselves, because of their beautiful beaches, will be the most touristic and prestigious part of the great metropolis in the future. Accra in Ghana, as I said earlier, is forming a business district to be part of the megalopolis. This city is likely to be a financial and distribution center. After all, Ghana, of which it is the capital, is the 6th country in the world in gold production ranking. Finally, Abidjan, which is part of the Ivory Coast, is a city with the 3rd largest French-speaking population in the world. It is also the 4th most populous city in Africa, with about 4.7 million people. It has the potential to be the cultural base for the entire megalopolis in the future, in the main, due to the best infrastructure in Africa and human capital building. Some of the best universities in Africa also operate there. This, then, is what the future zoning of this great super city may look like. Plus, a hypothetical map of the distribution of wealth. It is certain that the richest will live on the coast. There will be business and tourism. On the other side of the highway, there will be a residential part for the moderately wealthy. On the other hand, already in the second line from the road, as at present, there will be housing for the poorest part of the population, together with slums, because with such dynamic population growth and migration of people from the hinterland, it will be impossible to avoid extreme poverty, which in Africa is and always will be. The emergence of such a megalopolis with 500 million people is a real counterweight in global geopolitics competition for Europe to be the region located as a link between America and Asia. However, given the region's location, it is a close hub between the Americas, Asia, and most importantly, Europe itself and Southern Africa. This location will make the area extremely important for the global economy as well as politics in the next 30 years. So ignoring the processes that are taking place there could be disastrous for the modern world. One thing is certain, the emergence of such a large city is a challenge for humanity that we have not faced before, which makes this topic all the more important and interesting. Let me know what you yourselves think about it in the comments. From my side, that's enough for today. Stay tuned. Cheers.